Okay, Chris, I think we're just about ready to go live. And I'm excited to have you, Chris. I am going to let you introduce yourself when we start, okay?
Okay.
All right, just a moment. Hello, can you hear me? Hello. Hi, my name is Reverend Renee Kessler. Can you hear me okay? It's Reverend Renee Kessler. Can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me okay now? Hi, Chris, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, thank you. I am so sorry. I think we finally got it figured out, so my apologies. We are live and we are streaming, and I am so excited. Please forgive us for the technical difficulties. I think we got it worked out. Can you hear me okay? All right, thumbs up, thumbs up. Hi, I am Reverend Renee Kessler, and you are with the Beck Culture Exchange Center. We welcome you to the Beck Culture Exchange Center's Racial Justice Town Hall, Part 20. For nearly 2 years, we have done these racial justice conversations and discussions. All of our supporters, our members, our donors, volunteers, and to all of our friends, all of you encourage us to keep on getting into good trouble. Thank you for sharing with us, for joining us for each of these town hall meetings on racial justice, which actually began June 19, 2020. Following the murder of Mr. George Perry Floyd, an unarmed man at the hands of police on Memorial Day, Monday, May 25th, in Minneapolis, Beck launched its first virtual town hall meeting. While we did town hall meetings every year for Juneteenth as part of our Juneteenth celebration, June of 2020 was very special It became our first virtual town hall meeting. And during that discussion, we began on our pursuit of racial justice. Each of our discussions have been videoed, and you can view them online at beckcenter.net. Also, if you haven't already done so, we would love it if you would be so kind as to join us at beckcenter.net, sign up for our e-newsletter. Beck does an e-newsletter every week, but we are committed to telling the true story of African American history and culture. We're very pleased that you have joined us today. We thank you for being with us. We know that there are some of you who have never missed a racial justice conversation, and I thank you. I know that because I hear from you. I get to hear all of the ways when you love it, when you are interested in more deeper dive questions, you send those to me. So thank you very much. We are in pursuit of racial justice. Systemic racism must be eradicated. We believe that history is the great truth teller, and when we know the truth, then we can do better. We hope that these discussions will inform, inspire, and empower you on our journey as we journey toward racial justice. So on behalf of the Beck Board of Directors, and they are our board chair, Annazette Houston, Frank Robinson, Attorney Arnold Cohen, Sam Anderson, Cecilia Whittington, Dr. Stan Bowie, Dr. Mark Dean, Reverend George Dobler, Bernard Drury, Dr. J. Harvey Gillespie, Harold Hicks, former Knox County Commissioner Diane Jordan, Dewey Roberts II, Theresa Venable, and Mr. Irvin Williams. We say welcome. Welcome to the Beck. And I know I'm excited because Beck is really hopping these days. So I think we're probably, at least as we can see, on the other side of COVID-19, and happy not only to do these virtual conversations and discussions, but also to welcome you back here to the Beck. Tonight, our special guest has ties to one of our sons who called East Tennessee home, Alexander Mary Palmer Haley. Today, Beck published a great article on Alex Haley, and we shout out our archivist, Brianna Flanagan, who did an outstanding job on our this month's feature story of Alex Haley. And it was intentional that we did this story this month, and it's very intentional that we're having this conversation with this very special guest tonight, because we commemorated 24 years since the dedication of the Alex Haley statue in Haley Heritage Square on Sunday, April 24th. That's right. It was April 24th, 1998, that Tina Allen dedicated and unveiled and dedicated this beautiful statue in Haley Heritage Square, just in a beautiful rendition of our great Alex Haley. So we look forward next year to celebrating 25 years since the unveiling. In fact, this year was our anticipation of getting ready for the 25th anniversary. So mark your calendars and save the date for 2023, when we will commemorate 25 years of that statue. Alex Haley had lived in August. He will be, he was 100 years old actually last year. So he'd be 101 this year, and so we commemorate him. But tonight, we get the privilege of sharing space with one of his relatives. Joining us for our 20th racial justice discussion is Chris Haley, nephew of Alex Haley. Chris, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very pleased to be seeing your lovely face twice in the span of 7 days.
I feel the same way, Chris. And so Chris was here, and he was such a trooper. He joined us for the 24th celebration in the park, Haley Heritage Park, and did a fantastic job, along with all of our dancers and artists and singers and all kind of wonderful, and our community who came out, Chris, and we enjoyed you, and we're so glad that you came to join us. And I was very privileged to meet you. So thank you again for joining us virtually. It looks like once you come to Beck, you can't leave, right?
It seems that way. Who knew?
Well, we are very glad that you're here. But Chris, for those who may not have gotten the opportunity to meet you on Sunday when you were here with us celebrating Alex Haley's commemoration and dedication, would you mind to just share with us, who is Chris Haley and what does he do?
I don't, it's one of those things that people say, I think in life in general, that your whole life from birth to transition is a journey of self-knowledge, a journey of self-discovery. So what I tell you of who I am today was different from who I was, say, 30 years ago. Not that I'm 30, but anyway, who I may be 10 years from now. So
Right.
at this current time, I'll say I am a nephew of Alex Haley, father of three of my first cousins. I am an actor, a writer, a filmmaker, an archivist at the Maryland State Archives. I'm in the office, which is one of our meeting offices at the Maryland State Archives, which is located in Annapolis, Maryland, which is, I think, circuitously, if you think in terms of karma and how life leads you in some direction where you never thought you were destined to go, but when you look at it from a spiritual and a historical perspective, you feel like there could be no other place that you would end up. And that's because where I am now, where I work as the director of the study of the legacy of slavery in Maryland, where I have overseen a project for almost 20 years with many different regular employees and volunteers and also interns, have helped to uncover the lives, the biographical information of several free and enslaved Blacks and mulattoes from the colonization of Maryland, which is in 1634, all the way through the end of slavery in November 1st, 1864, when the Maryland Constitution was passed. And so within this work, primarily using federal census records from 1830 to 1880, and also certificates of freedom, manumissions, and newspapers for runaway ads and domestic traffic notices. Domestic traffic notices are the documents that would say, such as fine, young, healthy slaves, because at that term, that's what they would use, slaves. They wouldn't say enslaved, they would have just put it out as being slaves, for sale. That's a domestic traffic ad. So altogether on our website, which is www.marylandslavery.net. If you say legacyofslavery@maryland.com, you'll get to the site. We have information, I'd say about 400,000 bits of information about these individuals who nobody knew about and nobody would have known about except for this deep dive research that we've been doing for over 20 years, just as nobody knew who Kunta Kinte was. Years and years, and 200 and some years ago, when he ended up landing in Annapolis in America for 1 week before he was sold south to Virginia, or sold to the neighbor county of neighboring state in Virginia. And right within, I'd say, a 10-minute drive from here, no more than maybe a 20-minute walk, is the city dock in Annapolis, the capital of the state of Maryland, where there is the memorial to my Uncle Alex and 3 children of different ethnic backgrounds. So if anyone were to have told me years ago, when I was still actively pursuing an acting career, that one day you'll be working as a history person in the same city, in the same state where your ancestor was brought enslaved 250 some years ago, I would think, what have I done to deserve or to have the, I don't know, the onus of representing that space in time. And that's what's so amazing. And even when I was so fortunate to visit with you and the rest of the guests at the commemoration last Sunday, it's sort of that same thing again, that how amazing it is that someone whose main focus was being an actor and writing and singing and performing and entertaining others would morph that journey into being one where he actively pursues the acknowledgement of other individuals who were largely left purposefully unacknowledged through all of their lives, just as my great grandfather Kunta Kinte was acknowledged as a person as soon as he came to the United States of America. He was acknowledged as a product and as a person, as a creature, as a functioning, working, I guess one could say, human machine that would produce wealth engendering materials for his owner. But as an individual, he was basically relegated to nothing more than a cow or a horse or anything, a beast of labor. And so
Right.
my labor is making sure that people such as my great, 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 great grandfather do not go unknown anymore.
Wow. And so, Chris, I wanted to follow up on some of that you're talking about, because that's a lot of meat in terms of what you've been studying and what you've been researching, and that then dovetails into today. Because I always like the way James Baldwin says it. He says, if you're not afraid to look back, then
Right.
nothing can fight you. So I want to look back for just a moment, based on what you had just told me, really just in this very introduction. I also want to say to those of you who are listening and are watching us live, you are also welcome to offer questions or suggestions or comments in the chat feature. So please feel free to do that. We have someone that's going to be looking at that chat feature, but this is a town hall, so we welcome you to ask questions and to engage with us. So if you will ask a question or make a comment, we'll make sure that I regurgitate that here in this platform. Chris, you talked about how history sort of just has this moment where you look back and go, wow, and you find yourself in the middle of something. To your point, who could have thought all of these years later, this would be my work too? And so you talked about looking at it, and then they're gonna call them slaves, and they're gonna think of those human beings as slaves. And in your research and in your writing, I know that we have seen Alex Haley and your family's descendants to Kunta on his matriarchal side. What's an interesting 20 years, what's probably the most interesting discovery that you have made with in terms of the enslaved and researching and bringing voice to these stories that would help us today?
I think part of it is that there's perception and there's reality, and there's perception that is taken as fact. And what I'm very fortunate to do, and those persons who have worked with me are very fortunate to do, is that we focus our research on the actual original documents, which are based on what was happening at the time. Say back in the 1600s, so that's the 17th century, the 1800s, the 1900s, until slavery ended. And so what we have been able to look at are documents which are written at the time reflecting what was going on, not at the time concerning itself with, well, what will people think of us 200 years from now? What will people write about us in the books if we do this now? No, at the time these documents were written talking about an enslaved person and only listing them as being specifically their age and their approximate weight and what scars they had and their whatever familial connections they had. If they did run away, they were being very basic about it because they were not worried about how people thought they might be prejudiced or whatever, because it was something that was not in their mindset, because what they felt they were doing was right, and they're right, and I think, yeah, privilege too, privilege to be able to do this. So within all of that, what I think I found most surprising is that one of my most cherished mentors is a lady named Phoebe Jacobson, who helped my uncle find the Lord Ligonier connection. And she was saying, look at the laws. If you look at the laws, you will find out what a civilization, what a people were about at whichever time. So there were laws from the beginning of Maryland's colonization where if you were in an interracial relationship, a white woman with an enslaved person, or a Negro, because many times it was, quite frankly, synonymous, then you, the white person, could be sentenced, the woman anyway, could be sentenced like 30 years for the amount of time that you were, after the amount of time when you were found to be married or had a sexual relationship or interracial relationship with an enslaved man. And the same thing, there were even laws against white men having relations with enslaved women. We don't find many records of that ever being adjudicated.
All right, so
Other
let's
way-
talk about that, because we know, let me just stay right there with that law.
Right.
We're saying that there
Yes.
were laws about white men having relations with
Yes.
black women. What kind of law was it, and what kind of teeth was in it? Because we know
We know it was happening.
black women who
Right.
are, yeah.
Right,
Yes.
and it was going over that, but there was actually laws back in the 1600s that were levying some type of punishment, which could be no more than pounds and pounds of tobacco, because it was much bartering system. Because again, we're talking about the 1600s when we're still under the rule of England. It's way before the dollars come into place. So what that told me is that Black people and white people were getting married and being in not even necessarily the relationship of subjugation from the slave owner and his enslaved property. People were having relationships because they cared about each other. White people and Black people cared about each other, and they were having children together, and they were living as best they could as family units. And the powers that be did not want that. And so that's why you find all these laws against it. And then many runaway ads that I have found specifically will say that this enslaved person ran away, and we believe that he ran away. This one that I remember off the top of my head is 17, I think it's, I don't know, 1760, something like that, ran away with this woman who is his white wife and the children that they have. There's another ad that I remember very well about a person named Leonard, who is owned by a white woman, and she seems almost jealous of the fact that Leonard's like 31 years old, 6 feet something. I mean, she describes him in a very, I'd say, attractive way, being off with this other woman who's also white, and the two children that they have. And this is in about the late 1700s as well. So that was what was most surprising to me, is that we believe that it didn't happen, that no Black person and no white person could ever have been married, could ever have lived as one before 1967 with the repeal of the interracial law, at least in Maryland, and also the Loving law, the law of Loving, which was, I think, in 1967 or around the 60s as well. But it was going on. And I think that's part of what could help us today when we talk about racial inequality, and we talk about the races not being able to live harmoniously together. It was being done from the beginning. People of different races were living together from the beginning, and to such a degree that the General Assembly was legislating against that reality. And so I think disconcerting and regretful and disappointing that in many ways we seem to be fighting for that to be okay still today in many ways, for people of different ethnic backgrounds to have equality in love, in business, in play, in every aspect of life. That's still going on today.
So how do you legislate that? How do you legislate relationship today? How do you legislate unity today?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the thing, that what I feel like is what we have to be very careful of is when the inference is about other ways of I guess managing or putting restrictions or limiting allowances to what a person can or cannot do, or what's considered legal or not legal. I honestly think that we're bordering with that, with the laws against in Florida and laws against in Texas about what's euphemistically called the Don't Say Gay bill. So if we're talking about don't say gay, then what else are we talking about? What else are we not allowed to say? What else are we not allowed to talk about, to consider? This conversation we're having today, it would seem to me that in several places, you and I having this conversation today would be something that different bodies would want to be banned, would have stopped us. They would have implemented any technical difficulties we had. They would have specifically made sure that we had technical difficulties, because we're talking about issues of racial history, which was not always pleasant, which was often unequally or inequitably shared among persons in the United States of America. So I think it's one, we have to be careful, and we see these laws against having certain books published, having certain books made available in libraries, having certain topics spoken of in school.
Right.
Because the theory is that it will hurt somebody's point of view or somebody's feelings. And I always want to think, well, what about the feelings of the person who has been marginalized for all of their lives, and their children have been marginalized, and they have nothing in a history book to look at, to say that, oh, I could do that. I could be that because this person already was. What about that person or those individuals who
I
are
think you're right. So
empowered?
absolutely, there's so many issues around that in terms of hiding or suppressing the history. That really is a history of resilience when we think about it. It's also a great history for us to learn from. But as I'm thinking about it, as you're talking, and one of the questions I typically ask right early on when I jump into the racial justice conversation is, very simply, it was intentional that when we started these conversations or discussions, I didn't say, what is racial injustice, right? Because I think we all kind of can figure that one out. I think we can look at every area of life and sort of see racial injustices, and we can call that out. And so intentionally, we call these conversations racial justice in the pursuit of that, trying to figure out, well, what is that? So Chris, if I ask you, what is racial justice? You would say?
I would say racial justice is literally living the term blind justice, which is to say you cannot ignore that a person is Black. You cannot, and you should not ignore that a person is white, because visually it's just a reality. And I think
and actually visually, if you talk about it, when we talk about enslavement, it was a good profitable market to have something as visibly distinguishable, to say this group of people, because they look the way it's identifiable.
Exactly. And it was so much emphasized within these runaway ads. That's how they specified that you were finding this person in difference to somebody else. Right. It was a clear. So why try to approach things in a different way? So I think racial justice is acknowledging that someone is of a different ethnic background, but not, for want of a better term, holding it against them or negating what their access to the same resources as anybody else would have. Because I think one of the terms that I've often found problematic is when people say, I don't see color. Yes. And I think to myself, well, that implies that if you did, there'd be something wrong with that. I mean, I definitely see color if I see a white person or Asian person, but I'm not judging them on that color. Because if you say I don't see color, does that mean that if you did, there would be a problem? Does that mean that if you saw me as a Black man, you'd be like, well, I better clutch my purse because I see you as a Black man. But if you just see me as a man who happens to be Black, or if it's okay to see me as a Black man, I mean, I often think when Barack Obama was in office, and even now, certainly because he's such a public figure, and I would hear people complain about the fact that he only acknowledged or talked about being a Black American. And I thought, well, what else would you have him be? What else would you want? If you saw him walking down the street and you did not know who he was, would you describe him as a white man? Would you describe him as an Asian? Would you?
Right.
I mean, what would you possibly describe him? So what would you want him to say if he had come out and said, "No, I'm a white president"? It's like, would you have believed that? So I think that's part of what racial justice is: accepting somebody's ethnic background, but not judging them based on their ethnic background.
Mm-hmm. Accepting someone's racial background without judging them.
Right.
I read a quote that you did on a speech, and it hit me interestingly, and I need you to unpack that for me, because I have talked at great length about reparations, and we hear that word a lot when we talk about the historical narrative of Black and brown folks in this country, about the idea of reparations, and indeed in other spaces and places. And I want to read this quote from you, and it says, "I believe that Black and white Americans who are troubled by the vestiges of slavery and racism today do not desire reparations. They want equalizations." And so, end quote. That somehow that the real that Black and white Americans are not desiring reparations, but equalizations. I need you to help me unpack that.
Mm-hmm. What my feeling with that is that I think it's like, trying to make another example of what that means. If you're at dinner and you're being served whatever the meal is, and let's say it's peach cobbler or pie or whatever. So I'm sitting at the table and you give me, and it's a full pie, and you've sliced it in, I don't know, in 8 pieces. So you give me 1 slice and you give somebody else who's sitting at the table 3 slices. Now I know there's more slices there. and I'm thinking like, well, that's kind of weird. Why did you only give me 1 slice and you gave this other person 3 slices? And then there's another dinner, and then the same thing happens again. And then there's another dinner, and the same thing happens again. And it goes on and on and on and on. And then at some point, I'm like, I like to have an equal amount of servings as this other person. And so because it's been going on so long, I'm thinking that, okay, I want now the equal amount of what I have not been given for these 4 or 5 other visits that I've had at the dinner table with you when you serve this other person 3 slices every time for my 1 slice. So that I can feel like you are now giving me my equal partaking of this meal. That's not me saying I want more than this individual. I want you to give me my slices that makes me equal to what this person has been able to benefit of for years and years and years. And that's where we are, because the inequitable laws and practices that have been in place for hundreds and hundreds of years. I don't feel that I've seen any or heard any person of color ever talk about, I want more money than any European person has. I want a bigger house than any European person has. I want laws that make sure that I am better off than any European person is. What I have seen is persons who are thinking that for hundreds of years, for laws after laws after laws and laws, I have not been allowed to have the same salary as a person of equal qualifications as I have. I have not been allowed to see myself reflected in the entertainment media or in the scholastic world.
Let me interrupt you right there, Chris, because I want to pose another challenge for you there. So oftentimes, if we're sitting at the table and now we have equal slices of the pie, did we ever right the wrong from yesterday? Or are you assuming that if I get the pie today, that we on equal footing today, though I'm negative now,
Yes.
based on your example, there is 10 other times I was there that I missed 40 pieces of the pie. And then on today, we're gonna go equal. What happened to the 40 pieces? Because you're still ahead of me.
Right.
You got more weight on you right now. So right now, you done ate 40 pieces of pie, and I only had 4 pieces. And we're sitting in the pie today, and you're gonna now give me my equal slices. I still can't catch up to you in your weight, because you're still 40 pounds heavier than me.
Right, you're a fat cat, and I'm still skinny. And I'm still skin and bones.
Reparations looks at the fact that we can't start equal today because we're already behind, because we missed 40 pieces of pie yesterday. Help me with that.
And that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. That's why, whereas others see that as us wanting more in reparations, because it seems that we want more all at once. No, we want a cumulative amount to get us closer to an equal situation, because for so many years we have had less, and that has been all we've been allowed to aspire.
So you believe in reparations. So reparations, you believe in looking at that injustice from the sense of we're not starting equal today.
Right.
If we're starting equal today, we got to address the disparities that we've had from yesterday.
Right. Reparations is going toward equalizations. It's not going towards superiority. And that's what we've had to do.
Right. So it's not that we don't want that. So we want that. We want to go.
But I feel and I can't say I'm in the mind of other individuals. I mean, nobody can say that. I mean, some people can say that, but I don't think it's true. I think that some persons feel that in order for Black people to have reparations, it means they're losing something. It means that for me to give you equal, I have to be giving up something. And I think that's the wrong and not the correct. It's not the correct point of view. It's not the correct perception that I feel that African Americans have when they talk about reparations. I do not feel it's saying, I want more of what you have. We feel that there's a whole lot of, as people who believe in manifestations, that the universe has a whole lot of bounty to give us. And it's, but we want to be allowed to, quite frankly, catch up to all of what the universe had to offer us, which you did not allow us to take advantage of. It's slightly different, but to me, when persons have said that once Barack Obama became president, well, you've got what you need now, or I mean, what else is that? You've had a Black president, and I think, well, wait a minute. We are on our 46th president right now, and I think from what I looked at even earlier today, there's been 45 individuals who have held the presidential post. One of them has been Black. So are you saying that because there's been one Black president, that is equal to all the 44 other individuals who were president? I mean, that doesn't seem equal to me. That doesn't seem like, okay, well, we've got the one that's taken care of now. But I feel like many people who are against or are frightened or scared or worried about reparations, worried about equalizations, feel that for us to have anything more, they will lose.
They will lose. And so we got to dispel that myth. And let's talk. So when we talk about reparations, talk about coming out of emancipation. I'm talking to a historian here. Black folk are coming out of emancipation, and there's this whole idea, many people have heard this before. I need my 40 acres and my 2 acres and my 40 acres. So help us understand that. Take us back to that. What was supposed to happen even then? Because I think sometimes we gotta look at history, and we gotta look at what we knew then that never came to fruition. Can you speak to that for people who may have some questions about this reparations? I think sometimes we just have to keep going back so we can understand how this country was built and the systemic racism that was built into it.
Right. I think part of it is that what was, I mean, the irony of it, if irony is even the right word, because we don't know. But perhaps if Abraham Lincoln had lived, and if the predominantly liberal-minded Progressive Republican Party at that time, because that was the ideology at that time, had been able to move forward, in the manner in which they had the direction that they were taken when Lincoln was alive, there was the idea put forth of 40 acres and a mule to try to give persons who had been enslaved, who it was an acknowledged lack of resources that their involuntary servitude had legislated them to be, and legislated for their children, that we should give them something. We, the government, should give them something to help them move forward, to help them have a ground floor, so that they can also enjoy the fruits of liberty, which at least as far as ownership goes, they now have, subsequent to the passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments, which was to give them the right to vote and also the right to citizenship. So unfortunately, when Lincoln died, the backlash happened, or I like to call it the blacklash happened, where it was, well, this is too much. We can't let the Negroes have too much. So we're going to put in all these codes, and we're going to make it tighter and harder, and we're going to take back what we said we were going to do, because we want to reunite with our Southern.
So stay right there before you go forward. So that's the idea. But the point is, the idea was there. There was an understanding that there was a people who had been disenfranchised.
Yes.
There was an understanding that if they're going to start now, they are going to start on equal footing. If we don't give them something, that's 40 acres and a mule, whatever this is, they got to have something to start. Or otherwise, if we just bring them to the table and we just, okay, get started, we're going to all be equal now. Right. So there was the idea that we know you're not starting equal. We should do this. And I think that's very important in history, though it never materialized, to your point, and the reality of it never came to be. The fact that that was an initial thought immediately after emancipation, it hones in that, you know, when you've enslaved a person, when you have they had an opportunity,
right,
then there's no way you're on the same level and you're asking them to compete at the same level.
No, and it's absolutely, I mean, even today, when I was talking to another colleague of mine, when we think in terms of a person who has been imprisoned for whatever reason they've been imprisoned, if we have sentenced that person to a specific term of years in order to, quote unquote, pay their debt to society, after that time has been served, then the law is implying that you are now free, you have now served your time, you have now atoned for your sins by being incarcerated. Now you should be on equal standing to start your life over again on a new path. However, as we know, I don't know if it's changed anywhere in the United States. Maybe I think there's some state that actually has changed this. If you have a record as being convicted of a felony, you can no longer vote.
That's right. So
how does that make sense? How is that justifiable if the person has paid their debt to society?
The life sentence. So it's a life sentence.
Exactly.
And we know that life sentence disproportionately affects our African-American, our Black and brown communities.
Right.
Disproportionately.
So you've paid your debt to society, but we're still holding you accountable for what you did do. And so for Black Americans, in many ways, the laws that were subsequent to the ending of slavery with Juneteenth and all these individual states that ended it earlier than that, were still being judged based on their ethnic background. And that was going all the way through, well, even the unfortunate reality is that it seems like many people want to go back to it today. I won't say many, because I think the majority of people in the United States of America, judging by polls, are more progressive than I'll just say not progressive. However, it seems that those who are not progressive are more vocal and more active in getting to the polls and in screaming and shouting and making their voice heard, whereas I feel like to some degree, we have been beaten down so long that we don't think it's going to matter. So so we don't run to the polls
But
as
the
much.
truth is, if it was held, if it was withheld from us to vote, the truth is that they're trying to keep the vote from you
Exactly.
the rest of your life. It must be something important
Right,
about it.
exactly.
And so I hear you saying, Chris, that it's the legislature, it's the laws, and it's the ability to impact that makes a real difference. And so I think, and we've got a lot of work to do around that. I think you're
Yes.
right. But Chris, what's your work? What's the thing that you're doing to pursue racial justice? And obviously, as a historian, as a developer, a producer, all the things that you're doing, what are some of those things that you are doing to pursue racial justice in your field?
Well, specifically, it is trying to put out the facts. Whenever I do a presentation, as much as possible, whenever possible, I will bring a copy of a document that I have actually found within the actual records, which show the specifics of how many people voted for freedom and how many people voted against freedom. That there were laws and there were runaway acts that show that people who were in mixed race relationships, and shows that people who were African American had skills beyond what has been taken for granted. That many persons of color had second names, so it wasn't just perhaps the I say the cliche that Toby, it was just Toby, in difference to maybe he took the last name Toby Wall or whatever, or maybe he took his own name. And there's so many ads that I have that a person of color had two names, they had identities, they pursued their careers. And I feel that that's part of what cannot be denied when it's shown in actual primary source documents. Right. So in showing those, and in poetry that I write, I really have in this most recent book, I really am trying to write about the frustrations of being a Black person in America, and has been, when this, I'm saying it again, when this backlash has been put forth against the progress that has been made within the last, I won't even say hundreds of years, but then within the last 20 or so years, that to speak about that and to make it known about that, and so that for those persons who read it, they will see from a historian and from a Black man's point of view how hypocritical that is, and how opposite the American ideal is to want to subjugate and limit the rights to equality of any marginalized community.
Well, stay right there, because it's interesting. It's been 30 years since Alex Haley passed away. Alex Haley is going to be spending his life, to at least 12 years researching to find information about his family. And really, what he did is, he inspired us over 40 years ago to really begin to research our genealogy and our historical narratives of our families, and really change the trajectory for many groups, not just Black families and individuals, but really just put on the map how important genealogy was, the study of genealogy, understanding your heritage and your family history. And he brought that full circle, right? And part of that was understanding who he was, right? And who we are as people from the people we come from. And so I'm thinking about Alex Haley today, having been gone now 30 years, and I'm wondering, after having done this with Roots and worked on Queen and some of the other things that he worked on, to really hone in on how this country dealt with the enslaved all the way through, so that we can learn some things not only about ourselves and our own heritage and history, but that we can teach another generation about this history and the importance thereof, that we might leave this world better than we found it. 30 years later, looking at today, he's not been here for the last 30 years. What do you think he would say today about the state of what we have or have not learned from some of those things?
I think he would probably be very disappointed. Especially because Roots I would think would arguably be a book that those persons who are against Black history or against this perception that talking about the reality of slavery is making others feel bad, because he never felt that Roots was doing that. Roots was a story of preservation, resiliency, and the triumph of an American family who persevered in spite of circumstances that were inflicted upon them, that were not of their own making, which in and of itself would seem to be the classic American story to which all Americans should be proud, of which all Americans should be proud to emulate and to feel that that's something they also have in common. So for him to see that there's these movements against talking about the reality of the struggle via law against persons of African descent, he would be very disappointed. I would think that he probably would come up with some type of a story to try to relate the hypocrisy of it, the negative repercussions that will come from it, because just as for those who are familiar with Martin Luther King Jr.'s last work, Where Do We Go From Here? He talks very openly and very passionately about reparations and about how much the United States of America would owe Black people if they really were to come across with the amount of money that we would have accrued through those years of subjugation. And he literally talks in terms of, I think, billions of dollars. And this is billions of dollars in the 1960s.
Correct.
No, he only lived till 1968. So what is that today? It could be $1 trillion. So Martin Luther King is talking about this in his book. So I think my uncle would be along those lines of saying that, okay, if we really want to go into this, then you haven't seen nothing yet about how incredibly complicated the inequitable practices were institutionalized in America to keep people, Black people down, people of African descent down. So I think he would probably become much more of a vocal speaker about it, because for one, he'd be much older. He'd be 100 years old. And at that point, it's like, what do you care about? It's like, hey, I'm 100 years old. I'm gonna say what I want to say.
That's right, that's right. So Chris, many people watch this. There are people watching now, and there are people who will go back and view this conversation that you and I are having, and I'm really enjoying it. Thank you, and our time is about to run out. But I always say, I want to know from my guests, when we pursue racial justice, you talked about what you do, what your challenge is. But if young people are watching this, I'd like you to give us 3 things. One, if young people are watching this, what's your message to them about the pursuit of racial justice? 2, if Black and brown folks are watching this, what do you say to the Black and brown community in terms of their pursuit of racial justice? And finally, 3, the non-youth, the non-Black and brown other category. What do we say to them? Because so many of my friends in that other category say, Renee, what is it? What can I do? What is it I should be doing? I don't know where I should start in this pursuit of racial justice. So could you just share with us on those 3 levels, to those three geographies or demographics, what should we do?
I think I'll try to start from the third point to the first point, if I remember correctly that way. I would say for those persons who I would say are cousins, and of course I have cousins who are my cousins. It's mixed heritage. I have mixed heritage. So many of us have mixed heritage. I would say, if you were to think of this person not as, if you were to think of this person as a family member who did not have an ethnic background of differences, or whose ethnic background was different to you, how would you treat them if they felt that they had been marginalized, if they felt that there had been practices that had been put in place for all of their lives that have forced them, or have even made them feel inferior, or made them feel more challenged outside of their own circumstances to live an equal life, to live a healthy life? how would you reflect to that person? How would you respond to that person? Chances are you would be more empathetic, you would be more compassionate, you would be open to talking to them about, well, what can I do to help you feel better? What can I do to just listen to what your situation is, and how could I help you by meeting someone, by introducing you to someone who might be able to give you access to a higher paying job, or
So at
to
that point, though, it feels like you're gonna have to have a relationship with someone
right,
first.
exactly. You
So
have
there's
to,
a relationship that has to ensue with that individual before you can even begin to get to know them, to then
right.
understand what I can do. So are you suggesting then for those people who are not Black and brown and or the other category, that in order to really make a difference, you're gonna have to be in a relationship with?
Yes, right. It can't, you can't still look at the person as different from you. You have to try, because because if it's a human being, then that person is the same as you. And that's what we have to try to knock that down. If the person says, but I'm Black and you're white, then admit to it. You can't doubt it. You can't dismiss someone being acknowledging of that, because that's also dismissive of the person's reality and humanity.
We're running out of time quickly. So Chris, that second one, yeah.
About younger people, what they could do. I think
What did you say is Black and brown though?
Black and brown folk, I think we really should take enfranchisement, which is voting, and take it as if you were marching in the war, as if your back was against the wall and you felt like you had no other legal options or illegal options to use to gain your rights, because that really is the best way to go about it. And regardless of what the barriers that you see put upon you in the newspapers and by legislatures, then do not shut up. Do not believe that your vote doesn't matter, that your voice doesn't matter, because as much as the other side is arguing and fighting and shouting, you have the right to argue, fuss, and fight yourself. Please do not think that you don't. And because that is, in Maryland, the slavery ended by 375 votes in 1864. 375 votes. 375 votes. How many concerts do we go to today? There's probably 375 votes, people in there. So please, that's it. You vote, 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 vote. I know
the power of that vote, it's just really showing how significant that is. And it must be important if it's
register and vote. And yes, even if your vote doesn't end up being for the majority person, the fact that you vote will be noted, and then the persons who are trying to get your vote in the future will know that this is a voting person, and that quite frankly gives you power and it gives you voice. And what was the first one? The younger kids?
Yes.
The first one. The younger kids, I would advise younger kids as much as they can to talk to their parents, to talk to their grandparents. And I know that's saying a lot because I didn't do it when I was that age either. But I think that's how you can more relate to the fact that mommy and daddy and grandpa and grandma, pop, that they were just like you. And they had problems with their teachers, and they had problems with their classmates, and they had problems with this, and they needed to get money or whatever, but to try to relate to the circle of life.
I think so, that multi-generational approach and being able, and if you don't have the mother or the grandparents that are still with you, but they're neighbors, right? They're community folks, they're teachers, they're educators.
Exactly. The teachers, the pastors.
Yeah, I think so. I think that multi-generational, we believe really strongly here in Beck and oral history, talking to them about, there's history where you read, you and I study, you and I research, and then there's history where you can say there's lived history, where you speak to the person who lived the history, and that's a different lens than what you will read in the books. And I think that's critical for our young people to really be in the dialogue and do that multi-generational conversation about what they should be about. And so, Chris, I thank you, and I think that this has been an intriguing conversation, and as I said, it goes really fast.
Yeah, it does.
We want to unpack so much more, but before we sign off, Chris, I want to give you an opportunity to give me any last thoughts or remaining remarks that you would like to have, saved here, so that when someone is coming back across this, whatever takeaways you want us to have.
Okay, I think my main takeaway of recent effects that have happened is, and what the things that I'm trying to put out there It's just that to remember that we as I said, we do have a voice, but we only have a voice if we use it. And those who we feel are trying to suppress us and trying to suppress progressive, and progressive is not overtaking, progressive is, as I said before, trying to be in equal standing. They would want us not to say anything. They would want us to feel that we're powerless. So the only thing we can do and must do is to go against that. And what I think that, to remind people of the fact that the same forces that have been put in place to keep us from talking about Black history or to talking about equal rights for the LGBT community or for immigrants or whatever, that movement that pushed us this forward will become even stronger because of how much effort is being pushed against us right now, and to be empowered by that reality. Because just like the civil rights movement in the 40s and 50s and 60s and even 70s was in reaction to the heinous Black codes and laws that were being adjudicated or being put forth, it will happen again. And why wait for it to get so incredibly bad? Take it upon ourselves right now to contact your legislatures, and because they want to get voted in. That's the reality too.
Well, we need to know who they are too, so we need to know them and have a relationship with them. So I think that's a good point. Last question though, what book should everybody have? What's the book that everyone should be reading? I know.
Mine, but gosh, there's so many. I would say Ibram X. Kendi is a very good book to go.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
Ibram X. Kendi.
Gotcha.
The most recent book that he has out there. I think that was very good. And then also, I was just thinking about his name right now, but I'm not thinking about it. Oh, I can't think of his name right now. I'll send it to you later on. Yes, yeah. I was saying to the other guy the other day, because he's the other major, I'd say that the two Black young figures who are male, who are putting out books right now. Ta-Nehisi Coates. Ta-Nehisi Coates, right.
Yeah.
I think any book by him are probably.
Kwame sitting over here beside me. Yeah.
Yes, right. And also, what I would also suggest is that, because I just did a poetry presentation about maybe 3 weeks ago for the city of Annapolis about Black poets and how they approach civil rights. The collection of poems by Maya Angelou, collection of poems by Langston Hughes. Those poems, even though Maya Angelou is much more new, but Langston Hughes, even though those poems are back from the 1920s all the way up to when he passed away in the 1960s, so many of the things that he talked about and wrote about are reflective in what we're going through today. So I would definitely recommend, you can get them in the library, get those books out and look at them and just reflect on their words.
All right. Well, that's it. I think you did good. You gave us quite a bit to chew on.
I know, there's so much.
You did great. And you know what? You know me, I gotta throw it to Nikki Giovanni if we're gonna throw in a poet. Yes. So we can one of our natives here in Knoxville. But Chris, you're really a delight. You really are. And I thank you for all the amazing work you're doing. And I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to share this space with you at this time. But mostly, I'm very especially grateful to have met you. You have been a blessing to our community, and we thank you. And I know that Alex Haley would be very proud of his nephew.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for your work. Thank you to all of you who have joined us tonight for this very fascinating conversation with Chris Haley. Chris has done a fantastic job of just really opening our eyes and our thoughts to dig in deeper. And I think that's what these conversations are always about. You can't unpack it all in 1 hour, but you can begin to open it up. And my hope is that you will take some of these nuggets that Chris has done in this conversation that we have had, and you'll start unpacking it for yourself. Beck is in pursuit of racial justice because we believe that with history being the great truth teller, that if we can continue to have this conversation and this dialogue and put out resources for you and others to listen to hear from, and to force you to want to have some more dialogue and conversation, then we're doing our part. We think everybody has a part to do, and Beck is committed to doing our part. So thank you so very much for joining us for this. Beck is excited about all the exciting events and activities that we have coming up. We'll be back here next month doing racial justice conversations. We commit to you, that's what we're going to do every month, have this deep dive conversation and give you an opportunity to be a part of it as well. Visit us at beckcenter.net for all of our activities and upcoming events. Log on and make sure you're signed up for our Beck newsletter. But most especially, support Beck. Without your support, we can't continue this important work. So if you're a member of Beck, thank you. If you're a volunteer, if you donate to Beck, whatever it is that you do to support Beck, we thank you. And if you haven't done so lately, or if you've never supported Beck, we welcome you to join us here. We give you our word. We're going to be good stewards of all the resources that you entrust to our here. Beck is the only African-American repository in East Tennessee doing what we do. We're proud to do it. So until next time, we look forward to seeing you. Till then, we say that we wish you well and keep pursuing racial justice. I'm Reverend Renee Kessler here at the Beck Culture